Hello, I'm Jake Schulke. I'm here to talk about a grading system, which may be new or unique to you. So let's get right to it. Why the change from what we're used to? Well, because we really want to know what students are learning. We really want to know what they're learning. And their grade might not accurately reflect what they are learning. So we need to ask ourselves, what do we expect students to learn? How will we know they've learned it? And then what should their grade mean to the student, their caregivers, meaning their parents or guardians, and to the teacher? To answer that, we need to look at some historical grading systems and understand their limitations. These grading systems started during the Industrial Revolution. They were an easy way to rank children and put them into jobs. Modern versions have points, categories, weighted averages. They all have a percentage-based final grade, a letter, and allows us to kind of rank children. So what do we want the grade to measure? What do we want grades to teach children and teach them how to do? That's what we need to be taking a look at. So here's an example, a weighted categories grading system where homework is worth a certain percent, quizzes are worth a certain percent, tests are worth a certain percent, and there's some mathematics, some arithmetic that go into calculating the final grade and turning it into a letter. And then we have a points-based system where classwork and homework and quizzes and projects and tests are all worth a certain number of points, and they get added up and divided by the total possible, and we end up with a percentage and a letter grade. But the limitations of some of these, a student can learn very little, and it can still be mathematically possible for them to receive a very high grade, despite not having learned much. Because so much of the grade is devoted to things other than actually measuring their learning. Vice versa, student can also learn a lot and receive an F if maybe they are academically doing very well and learning a lot, but not doing things like meeting deadlines or turning in pieces of paper or submitting assignments. So in those cases, what is the grade actually measuring? Well, it's clearly not measuring learning to the extent to which we want it to. So, how can we make that grade work better and actually tell us what is in a child's mind? What knowledge and skills do they have? And in what knowledge and skills are they proficient? So, step one, measure the right thing. We have some identified learning targets. We have the next generation science standards for science. These spell out exactly what students should be learning and how to teach it and how to test it. It requires a lot of work to turn that into curriculum, which works for as many students as possible, and to assess the learning accurately. So what do those assessments look like? Well, here's an example. Students built some roller coasters, and then they used those roller coasters to demonstrate whether or not, or how well, or to what degree they understood these concepts related to potential energy in a system of multiple objects. So this was an example of an assessment which we've used. Assessments then get graded using very clear team-developed rubrics so that any science teacher could look at this exact same submission and grade it exactly the same and give it a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1. You'll see on the rubric that a 4 means student exceeded the standard. They can do everything an 8th grader needs to learn how to do and then some. Meeting the standard, that would be a 3. Almost meeting would be a 2. And then definitely needing some improvement or having minimal understanding, that would be a 1. And no attempt or not enough information, that's a 0. Here's that a little bit bigger for you. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. A, B, C, D, F is how you might think of those. And really all they mean is we're saying whether or not the student has met a standard. That would be a 3. If they're not quite there, if they're definitely not there yet, they're not even close, if we don't have enough information to know how close they are, or if they can do all of the 3 stuff plus more advanced, more complicated stuff, then that could be a 4. And to go back to that slide, our goal is for all students to learn and demonstrate knowledge at grade level. A B is a very good grade. So, what does the learning process look like? Well, it starts at the beginning and it ends at the end. We're very used to grading stuff closer to the beginning when we're not quite at the end. So let's talk about it. We have lessons, we have coursework, classwork, homework, labs, and projects. We have these diagnostics in the middle. You might think of those as quizzes or checkpoints or checks for understanding. And at the end, we assess how much is in their brain. The end is when we actually measure what they've learned once we've completed the process. Coursework includes all our daily stuff that we do. So what we're going to do in this system is we're going to review the work. We're going to put feedback on it so the student knows what they're getting and not getting. They're going to enter it into a digital notebook and maintain that as a portfolio to notice their own learning process. And we are not going to give it a score or a grade. We will enter it into Aries just as a record of completion. I'll elaborate on that in a minute. So what happens when we put points and penalties on coursework, stuff that comes in the middle of the learning process? We end up with a lot of bad results. Stress and anxiety is a big one. And when students experience stress and anxiety, their brains literally stop working. It actually shuts off activity in their prefrontal cortex, which is where their complex and higher level thinking takes place. So do we want them stressed and anxious and worried about points and penalties and what if and how much is this going to affect my grade on everything they do in class? No. I want the opposite of that. I want them to just enjoy the learning and be focused on that. And that's it while we're learning. Other results, we see a lot of cheating and a lot of copying. Students get focused on turning things incomplete by the deadline. And then we see a lot of students copying each other's work just to get it turned in and not lose points. It is remarkably common, and that is all I'll say about that right now. What we don't get is we don't get students learning how to learn. And that's what we want. We want students learning how to learn and not being punished for things that are beyond their control. So, no points, no penalties, that's over. Understanding their progress. Students will be able to see the feedback, which we leave on their coursework, comments, corrections, and we're not going to calculate that into their final grade. We'll also have those diagnostics, the quizzes or checks for understanding. Many will have scores, some will have specific feedback, and those will not be calculated into the final grade. This is all part of the process of putting knowledge into their brain. It's all part of the process. And it's going to take time. We start at the beginning of a unit or a unit segment, and the student does not have that knowledge yet. And then we build it up and we check it, and we build it up and we check it, and then they're going to have a little bit more, and then we build it up and we build it up and we build it up. And then when it's finally supposed to be nearly complete, when the student should now be able to demonstrate proficiency, that's when we assess them. When their brain has that stuff in it, when we've practiced it enough that they can do it. So their final grade is grading the end result, not the process, because that process might look very different for various students. So I just told you that their whole grade is going to be based on assessments, and we're not putting homework and quizzes into the final grade. So if that makes you feel nervous, congratulations, you're normal. It's okay to feel nervous because this is different, but it is backed by a ton of research into neurology, cognitive science, and pedagogy. Questions you might have: how can a parent or student track progress? How can a student raise their grade? What if a student does not do the classwork? What about their participation, their work habits, their behavior? Well, let's look at that. First of all, Aries. Here's what Aries might look like. We have all their different standards categorized. We have scores on some of them that the student's been tested on. We have some assignments, some coursework, and we can see which ones are complete or not. We have some diagnostics entered here as quizzes, and we can see the student's score on those and tell that they scored low on one, they scored well on another one. So it's all there. All the information's there. We just have to take the time to read it. And at the bottom, we can see for the standards, We get to see the points that the students got in their average and how it affects their final grade. Now, because their final grade is what we call rubric based, the only thing that you'll see the points, the average, etc. for is going to be the standards. So, to track a student's progress, monitor ARIES. Look for coursework completion. Look for diagnostic scores. And then ask questions. The parent should be asking the questions of the student. This looks like it's not complete or not done. What's the deal with that? This quiz, it looks like you got a low score. What are you doing to learn what you didn't know? Not, why did you get a low score? That is a bad question. What are you doing to learn that material is a good question. So, how can I raise my grade? Very common student question. Step 1, to raise your grade. Meet the teacher outside of class time. Discuss the learning target you didn't meet. So the only thing that affects the grade is assessments. Which assessment is bringing your grade down? Let's look at the learning target. Let's review the student's work and see what went wrong with the learning process. Maybe they were absent. Maybe they didn't get something and we kept moving along instead of taking time to learn it. Let's take a look. Let's go back. Let's create a study plan so the student can go back and learn it and then demonstrate their learning. Step 2, once we have the study plan, then go and learn. Do the missing work. Come to tutoring. Complete additional study activities from the teacher or the tutor. Learn it. Go learn it. Then, when you have learned it, retake the assessment. We'll give a student a different version of an assessment, checking the same skills and knowledge, and replace their score. What if a student chooses not to complete coursework? Well, if they don't complete the coursework, they're probably not going to learn the material, they're probably not going to pass the assessment, and then they're going to have to go back and do the coursework in order to retake the assessment. So the end result of not doing the work is doing the work. What about their participation, their work habits, and their behavior? Well, participation is something very subjective. It looks different for every student. It can look different to every teacher. It's not going in the final academic grade. Their work habits. They already have their own separate grade, and so does behavior. It has a citizenship grade. So those things don't need to go in the final academic grade. So my recommendations to families and to students is 1, have conversations regularly. Look at the grade together. Look at individual scores and ARIES together and talk about them. What was that quiz on? What have you done to boost your knowledge since then? And then just watch carefully for a while. Pay attention to the grade and talk more. Give it some time. Students are probably going to test this system. I don't know if you knew this, but sometimes teenagers will test boundaries to see how things work, to see what consequences really are, to see what they can get away with in some cases. So watch carefully and give it a little bit of time. If you need to, reach out. You should already have my email address. Drop me a line. Let me know when to call you on the phone. Let's talk about your student and how they're doing. Let's stay on top of it together. I'm on your team. All of these changes are intended to help your student learn and succeed and learn how to learn and be better prepared for what's coming next, to be better prepared to succeed in high school and college and careers and whatever they decide to do with their life. So, give it some time, be very engaged. Let me know when you need to talk. Thanks for your time. Take care.